Welcome. Totally big day for TRUI. So launch of Natural Capital Region. So one of 5 integrated apps in the Natural Capital Suite. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context about Natural Capital Suite, why we're building it out, what we hope to achieve with it, and then we'll talk specifically about Natural Capital Region, and I'll run through a reasonably high-speed demo, and which hopefully will raise some eyebrows and prompt you for a bunch of questions. So we'll have a bunch of question time at the end. So let's get into this. So Natural Capital Suite, we're about streamlining investment into nature. So if you've been paying attention, so there's been some great and bold sort of initiatives for nature from the government, but even more so, sort of pretty bold commitments from corporate Australia and corporate internationally. So what's motivating us here is, so 69 out of the world's 100 largest economies, they're companies, not countries. And so they're putting out even bolder kind of claims to protect the environment than the government is. So we're very familiar with carbon commitments, but increasingly this is stretching across to kind of nature repair and the environment. So trying to work out what the kind of the potential of that is in terms of the nature repair industry and how we might support that. So increasingly, and this is changing kind of day by day, commitments are changing from sort of a policy commitment to hard numbers and committed capital to invest in nature. There's a lot of words on that slide, but the key point is in the top left, the current industry generously is about $2 billion a year, and it's almost entirely through government grants and philanthropic growth. So we're looking at an entirely kind of new demand on this for the nature repair market. So if you add up all those numbers, you pretty quickly get to about 50 billion of sort of committed capital for nature repair by 2030. So it's a really significant potential uplift to this nature repair industry. So if we think about how that industry works now and how can we kind of best facilitate that investment to get good outcomes on the ground. So if we sort of coarsely think about the industry in terms of the current demand being almost entirely driven by government and philanthropic investors, our supply side is mostly private landholders doing great work on land, but the interaction between the two is it's got a high transaction cost. So each government grant will come with hang on, let me just open that, get someone else in. Each government grant will come with other restrictions and reporting requirements. So how do we make this industry kind of more accessible and investable, if that makes sense? So for this new side of the demand side, so the industry finance sector. And so this is where we've been paying our attention in developing Natural Capital Suite from TRUI's world. So in our background, we've built 20 plus environmental reporting, environmental modelling web apps to support our government clients. So we've put that experience together to try and come up with a solution, Natural Capital Suite. So Natural Capital Suite is a series of 5 integrated web apps dealing with kind of different high friction points across this supply chain, if you like. And mostly what these things are doing are supporting our existing kind of delivery partners, the NRM regions, if you like, ultimately to provide a product that has high confidence as investable from the demand side of the market. So we've got Natural Capital Region. It's about regional planning. This is the focus of today's talk, so we'll get into that a whole lot more detail. Natural Capital Project, being able to design and plan projects down at the farm scale. Natural Capital Account, about being able to quantify good land stewardship at a farm level and provide confidence up your supply chain around that. Natural Capital Impact is about being able to tell that story. So, show your credentials into the broader marketplace about the great work that you do and implementing on-ground work. And why these things all work and why they're integrated is because there's an underlying series of 20-odd different measures that are consistent across all of them. So we're effectively talking about a consistent currency to be able to plan and design and deliver and communicate these individual projects. And ultimately, we present these things into a marketplace, so produce kind of investable projects. So think about it in kind of coarse terms like Airbnb for the environment. So it's about having a consistent underlying way to quantify and represent things. So the new investors in this sector are able to find projects and connect with potential project proponents, and ultimately, deliver cost-effective on-ground benefit for nature. So now let's talk about natural capital region. And this underlying premise applies across all of these things. So when we started on this journey a few years ago, we looked at what are the things that matter, what do we want to quantify, what's natural capital more broadly. So we looked across all sort of regional plans around Australia, regional land management plans, and there's a really consistent set of measures that people want to report against, people want to improve upon, and they loosely kind of group up in this way. And then when you look at what happens on the ground, there's more or less, particularly at a regional level, there's more or less a fixed range of things that we can do. So preservation, nature repair, broadacre agricultural practice change, intensive ag work, and point source pollution activities. So essentially what we've got with natural capital region is a capture of what the current condition is of all those things we care about. We're able to capture all the actions or activities that we do and quantify the relative interaction of those things. And once you've got those two things in one place, you're able to create scenarios, run scenarios, look at different potential investment portfolios and how that might play out, what it might cost, what the potential benefits might be. So that's where we get to with natural capital regions. So it's about planning regional nature repair programs for the greatest environmental and social outcomes. So fundamentally, it's to answer the question of what should I do and where to get the best outcomes. So this is about planning for the future, and also all those historic investment programs that might have been for a single grant program around just water quality or biodiversity. What are the additional co-benefits that came out of that as well? So how do I capture that so that I can report that? And so natural capital regions really targeted at those who manage landscapes on a large scale. So state, federal government and regional bodies. So we've been building out natural capital region for, it's probably 3 years since we totally first started on this as Economics, the initial iteration of it. And so we've tested and iterated to build up this stable platform now. And we can roll these out anywhere in the country now. So far we've got all of Queensland covered, all of Tasmania covered, Corangamite in Victoria, the Northern Rivers region, New South Wales, and in WA, I'm trying to think of the name now, not Southern. Anyway, you can see
Geograph Bay, Southwest Victoria.
Geograph Bay, thanks, Dave. And we're in the process of looking at this across all of South Australia as well. So that's where we're up to. Let's go and do a demo. Oh, before I get to the demo, so in terms of being able to track down content and information about what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, there's a lot on the Natural Capital Suite site. So under each different product, there's a fair bit of detail. So we're talking about natural capital regions today. Something that's totally going to come up is what's the underlying data that you're using here. So each region will vary, but also have some common elements as well. So we've got a page here that links through to every one of the underlying instances. So I'm going to show you an example from NRM North in Tasmania. So we've got a link here through to the underlying data that we've used to develop this instance of natural capital region. So without further ado, jump into the app. So this is natural capital region instance for Tassie North NRM. So that's the extent of the implementation. So we set these things up with, well, subcatchments or planning units. And this initial page we call the condition page. So when we collate the current condition, underlying condition presented here, so which is kind of useful in itself to be able to explore. So for example, we might care about knowing whether the hill slope erosion hotspots might be, where the biodiversity opportunities might be. So, or we can do them separately or in combination, or put all of those underlying measures on to create an underlying hotspot map of where we think the opportunities might be. So often when you'll do a natural capital audit or assessment, this is kind of the end point of that, collating the current condition, being able to create a kind of priority hotspot map. There's an additional way to explore this data as well, so we can look in at each of these underlying catchments and see what the underlying measures and metrics of those things are. So this in and of itself, the condition page, we find is quite a useful thing, and it's quite a useful thing to be able to share as well. So I can copy that. Where's my chat? So that's a useful thing to be able to share. So I should point out, this is not the real story or real data necessarily that I'm presenting here. This is our staging versions that I'm demonstrating, but you'll get the idea of what's going on here. So I want to give you a little example here from Northern Tas. So a Tamar Valley or Tamar Estuary Program. Jesse Webster did a great presentation at the NRM conference about a month ago about this program targeting riparian investment. So as an example here, what we're going to do is have a look at the actions that you might do for that Tamar Valley Estuary Program. So I have this concept of action library, so collections of things that you might do. So I've created a little action library for this Midlands project, and I put two actions in here. One's riparian fencing, stock exclusion, and active revegetation. And the other one is just fencing and stock management, no revegetation. So let's have a look at how we populate out an action and describe what that is. We give it a name, we can give it a description, we set up some attributes around that, what area of land, type of land that it's acting on, what proportion by default are you likely to have a crack at applying this over. So we're never going to get 100%. So first go, let's try and cover 10% of the available unvegetated riparian areas that we're going to attack for this. We put our CapEx and OpEx costs associated per hectare basis for this project, and we quantify the confidence we've got in those underlying cost figures. These are my cost numbers, not Jesse. So don't hold your hat on those numbers. And then we quantify the relative impacts of this action on each of those underlying, all these underlying indicators. So on a stream bank erosion, we've got an efficacy style approach. So we're saying we're going to improve or reduce the stream bank erosion by about 5%. The relative speed of that with active replanting would be relatively fast as those plants get up and established. So for example, the other action where we're not actively replanting might be a slow start because it'll take a while for the existing seed bank to germinate. And then we quantify the relative confidence we have in that underlying prediction as well. So we can represent how this action might affect all of those indicators and then provide a relative confidence around that as well. And you'll see how that plays out when we run a scenario. There's another component to representing an action, which is being able to describe the likelihood of adoption. So this matters because, you know, typically we'll model things, here's a great idea, and we'll assume that everyone's going to turn up on day one. And that's awesome, but in reality, trying to roll these things out on the ground, not everyone shows up. And even those that do show up take time to get there as well. So you need to be able to represent that temporal flow, which matters in terms of cash flow to deliver a program. Also matters in terms of the overall cost because you'll extinguish the available kind of cheap stuff often much quicker than you think. And a final element here is about the advanced. So all of those features, we can set locally specific at the subcatchment level parameters around what those might be. So that's great. That's our action library. We've got two actions in here. Now let's run a scenario. So the Tamar Estuary Program. Let's do that. So here's one I prepared earlier. Tamar Estuary Program. We're doing riparian projects. We're going to forget about the adoption for now. So we're just going to do the old school way, assume 100% adoption and immediate implementation of these things. And we're going to run this to meet a budget. So we've got an $11 million budget we'll run here. Alternatively, we could select to perform all actions. It'll just do everything and tell us the total cost and the total benefit, or we can do targets. And so that's another element in here as well. So ultimately, we'd like a 20% reduction in nitrogen, let's say. What would it cost? What should I do to achieve those targets? So we're going to run this in budget mode. We're going to define the locations where this matters. So it's not across the entire domain of NRM North. It's just all these catchments that are contributing into the Tamar River estuary. So we can play with that on the map, or we can select them over here. Now we select what's our actions, what are our, the collective things we're going to do. So we've selected that action library that I was just showing you before. It's just got 2 actions in here, the description of what they do. When you've got bigger libraries, we can filter those actions by the type of action, the indicators that they might target, the relative confidence we've got in those actions. So let's run a scenario with only our very high confidence activities. We can also filter them by the likelihood of adoption. So let's go with a high confidence and high likelihood of adoption. And we can also filter them by the response time, all the things that are going to work fast. We've only got 2 actions here, right? So we're just going to run them both. I'll talk about negative actions in a minute. We get onto our advanced, and this is where we get to prioritize what matters to us under this particular funding round. So for this particular funding round, it was totally a water quality driven story. So we're caring about rather these sediment and dissolved components. So we turn those on. We can weight them as well as we like. So all the underlying measures that we've got, so they can be priorities, any combination and permutation of those things, and the temporal component, the relative speed at which they act, come here as well. And then some other broader things, so economies of scale. So we want to weight actions that are in a catchment where there's lots of available farmers to do these sorts of things. So this process gives us a prioritized list of action by sub-catchment. Can run that and we'll get our overall result here. So for that program, we've got an overall result here. We've got a 37% improvement in biodiversity over that. We can break that down, look at the subcomponents biodiversity. So this is a sort of big wetland contribution. That makes sense. We're working in riparian zones. Jump back to all. We can drill into that and look at it regionally as well. So each of those subcatchments, what's the relative benefit we're getting out of that? Jump back up to the collective subcatchment. We'll look at how that cost breaks down over time as well. So we've got, and these things had a reasonable size capex and a smaller opex. So the operational costs, small down here, add them together, get our overall cost breakdown over time. This is a marginal cost abatement curve. So what we've got across the x-axis here is the incremental increase in cost for each action. So this is the first action we're implementing, the second action we're implementing, and on the y-axis, the additional improvement as you go through. So the point of a marginal cost abatement curve is you're looking for points like this. So we're getting some really great return for all these early investments, and then things start to plateau out. So we're getting a diminishing return. So, so even though we're spending $11 million here, we would have got a pretty big hit on the biodiversity scores around the $2 million hit. And then we're getting into even more detail for this scenario, each of those individual actions and their locations, what they might cost, the total area treated, and what the collective benefits are across all of those indicators. Cool. That's cool. Great. What about if we look at thinking about adoption? So I've got that exact same scenario, but what I've said, let's think about realistic adoption levels that go in here. So I'm going to jump straight through to that end explore page. You can see, well, in fact, it's much easier if I put them side by side, right? So let's compare it with the one that we just had. Right, so the one on the right here is without adoption. The one on the left is with adoption. So what you'll see in the adoption scenario, we're not getting as high, and we've also got a different shape to this curve. So it takes time to get landholders on board, and ultimately we're not achieving as much because we're exhausting the cheaper stuff. And we can scroll down and look at that comparison. You also see with the adoption comparison, the burn rate varies as well because not everyone's coming on board initially. Okay, that's Tamar. Oh, what's that? Another neat thing that we can do here is jump back to that explore. So this end result here, we can share that as well. Again, not real numbers, but you'll get the concept. So you can click on that link in the chat and explore that. So it's great. You can come up with a scenario, share that scenario. So you've got those using the tool, doing the modeling within the tool, and then being able to share the starting point, share the end point, and not have other operational or even kind of executive level stuff having to deal with the modeling. They can see the end result. So let's jump to a bigger example. So Paul Webb, you'll be familiar with this part of the world. So Paul has been on this whole journey with us. Our initial program of works was in the Queensland Murray-Darling Basin region, which we've got implemented here. So again, we've got the same initial condition screen. We can look at hotspots, look at our water quality areas, our biodiversity. Oh, there's a lot of red there. Combine those things up to see where the investment potential might be. Let's jump in and I'll just run you an example. I did a crazy one, which everyone does. First thing you ever do everything everywhere all at once. What's the massive big number? You know, what's the maximum we could spend here? So I said, do everything everywhere all at once, 100% adoption and immediate adoption. Don't worry about a budget. Location wise, we've got everything turned on. Positive actions. So this is an action library that Paul Webb and David Waters have worked on. So we've got 32 different things that we're representing here. So you can cast your eye across those. You'll be familiar with many of these things. And I've got no negative actions on this one. That's right. On the advanced here, I've just said prioritize it for biodiversity. It doesn't really matter in so much as we're doing everything anyway. So the end result here, and there's a lot going on. Take a few seconds to load this one up. So we're operating at a pretty big scale here across, what did I say? There's 30 actions, there's 40 regions. Multiply them together, that's the computation that we're doing. And again, we can look at it kind of region by region, what's going on. Okay, so we're dealing with kind of relatively small scale regions and also very large scale stuff as well. So there's one other feature that I wanted to bang on a little bit about here, and it was about, oh, sorry, what I didn't do. Let's go back down and explore that. When we're doing everything everywhere all at once and we're caring about biodiversity, right? So we'll let that load back up again. Looking at this marginal cost abatement curve, right? So we're getting some really great wins really early on, you know, so even though that total number was, we came up with about $20 billion we could spend, we're getting some big hits down here. So around the $90 million mark, you know, things are starting to, we're getting marginal improvement. So if we go back to scenarios, just have a look at a $90 million budget. We're getting some great improvements here. That marginal cost abatement curve is more like we see, so like we want, so it's not totally flattening out. That's totally great. And I was going to show another scenario. I was going to do the same thing, but with adoption. And in this case, we've got some more kind of brutal adoption likelihood figures here. So on the left-hand side is our initial one, where we said everyone's going to turn up on day one, and that's going to work. And on the right, we've got where we're considering adoption. Now I'm scrolling down. So that overall improvement way down, just because we have to jump to the more expensive things more quickly. So for that $90 million, we're not getting anywhere near what we could optimistically hope for. So it's kind of one of the things we're trying to be able to facilitate that discussion about what the adoption levels might be, how you might improve those. So one last thing that I wanted to talk about was this concept of negative actions. So when we started, we set up the initial condition. That's what the current state of all those parameters are. Then we predicted what the improvement might be. But often at the time in sort of business as usual, there's a continuing decline. And so unfortunately, in this part of the world, we're continuing to clear vegetation. So we want to be able to capture that decline in the underlying condition because effectively that's the moving baseline that we're continually having to move from. And what that also allows us to do is to be able to capture and value maintenance style work, preservation work, pest management work, which is often kind of undervalued. So if we can demonstrate that that work is stopping the decline and keeping that upper baseline, it gives it a value. That makes sense. So in this case, I've got no positive actions. I've just got one negative action, and this negative action is to continue clearing Category X. So in Queensland, Category X is vegetation that's still allowed to be cleared at around 1% a year. And we'll have a look at the result of that. So we see a decline in each of these parameters over time, but we have some improvement here. So our regional economic score is improving here. So we're effectively opening up grazing lands. And so there's an economic boost for that. So things go up and down. I reckon that's just about enough on Natural Capital Region. You get a sense of what it does, and how it might work in your world. So before we jump to questions though, so I'm going to point you to some other resources. So on the truey.com website, there's quite a lot of Truey stories. So all these sort of topics that we've kind of thought deeply about to try and come up and deliver these products. We'd like to write stories about, communicate why we've done what we've done and where we're going with this stuff. And Truey Conversations is a podcast where we invite folks from representing different parts of the natural capital sector, if you like, get their views on where the risks and opportunities and likely future might be. And then while I've still got the screen shared, so we're currently dealing with the Natural Capital Region launch, and now we've got some upcoming events over the next 3 Fridays where Dave Waters is going to sort of get under the hood and show some of the details about how this stuff works for Natural Capital Region. And then Tori Grice is going to do a launch for Natural Capital Impact following that. And in order to be able to find these things, or the videos post-presentation, so under support, there's lots of videos about how to use the tool, so underlying, but also this is where we'll post these videos so you can share them